So now, guess who's jealous of Adele? Beyonce. Beyonce needs auto-tune. Adele, Aretha, Celine, Dionne Warwick, and Mariah. They need nothing.
Power God. This is why Adele has to get on the podium and thank Beyonce. When actually she did it because of my manager, my label, my A&R, and all of the I created for her to exist.
What if one of the most talked about rivalries in music history isn't really a rivalry at all, but something far more uncomfortable that no one in the industry wants to say out loud? Because Wendy Williams just reignited a firestorm online after revisiting claims about tension between Adele and Beyonce, and suddenly, social media is split straight down the middle. For years, people dismissed Wendy as messy, controversial, even reckless with her words. But now, old clips, award show moments, and viral fan theories are all resurfacing at once, painting a picture that the internet can't seem to agree on. Why does every major award moment seem to come with a Beyonce mention? Why did fans once compile entire videos of celebrities publicly thanking her during speeches? And why did that trend become one of the most debated topics in music culture? At the same time, Adele's emotional Grammy moments, her speeches, and her public admiration for Beyonce are now being rewatched under a completely different light by online commentators. But here's where things get even more intense, because what started as music industry admiration is now being turned into a full-blown debate about influence, power, and pressure behind the scenes. Is this just fandom overanalysis taken too far, or is there something deeper happening in how the industry operates behind closed doors? And once you hear everything people are saying now, you might never watch award show speeches the same way again. The moment that conversation hits the internet, it doesn't stay small for long. It spreads like wildfire across comment sections, reaction channels, and fan pages, each one adding their own interpretation to what Wendy Williams originally said years ago. And the interesting part is not even the claim itself, it's how differently people are reacting to it now compared to before. Back then, Wendy's commentary about the music industry was often brushed off as entertainment gossip. Something loud, messy, but not necessarily taken seriously. But in today's social media environment, every old clip gets a second life, especially when it involves two of the biggest names in modern music. Now suddenly, everything is being rewatched. Every award show speech, every interview pause, every carefully chosen thank you moment on stage. And people are trying to read between lines that were never officially there in the first place. One of the most viral talking points comes from the pattern of awards speeches themselves. Fans point out how often major artists acknowledge influence, inspiration, or gratitude toward industry giants during big wins. In this case, that conversation has become heavily centered around Beyoncé's cultural impact in the music industry. But industry veterans argue something different. They say this is not unusual at all. In entertainment, influence is constantly acknowledged because no artist builds a career in isolation. Producers, mentors, labels, collaborators all play a role in shaping success stories. Still, the internet doesn't operate on technical explanations. It operates on perception, emotion, and viral framing. And that's where the situation becomes complicated. Because when Adele delivered some of her most emotional award acceptance speeches, people didn't just see gratitude, they saw meaning being assigned by the audience. Every pause was analyzed. Every word was replayed. Every expression became part of a larger narrative being built online. At the same time, Beyoncé has always existed in a different category of public perception. Her career is often discussed in terms of influence, legacy, and artistic evolution. That level of fame naturally creates intense scrutiny, where even normal industry interactions are turned into theories. And that's exactly what is happening here. What started as a Wendy Williams commentary clip has now turned into a full-scale internet debate about power, influence, and perception in the entertainment industry. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because not everyone agrees that this is even a real conflict in the first place. Some critics argue that the entire conversation is built on fan interpretation rather than factual events. They say the internet has a habit of turning admiration into obsession, and then turning obsession into conspiracy. According to that perspective, what people are calling pressure or fear is actually just respect being misread through a dramatic lens. On the other hand, supporters of the theory argue that there is a deeper cultural dynamic at play in the music industry, one where certain artists become symbolic figures of success, and where public acknowledgement becomes almost ritualized in award culture. This is where the debate becomes less about individuals and more about the industry itself. Because the entertainment world is built on perception management. Every speech, every appearance, every statement is carefully curated. Nothing is fully spontaneous, especially on global stages like award shows watched by millions. So when viewers see repeated patterns, similar phrasing, similar acknowledgments, similar emotional tones, they naturally start building narratives around them. And social media amplifies that process. A single viral clip can be slowed down, zoomed in, captioned, and reinterpreted thousands of different ways within hours. What was originally a simple thank you speech becomes a cultural debate. In this case, the conversation also touches on how audiences project relationships between major artists, especially women in the industry. Instead of seeing parallel success stories, the internet often tries to create rivalry narratives, even when none are officially confirmed by the artists themselves. That pattern is not new. It has existed for decades in music history. But the scale of it has grown dramatically in the age of TikTok and YouTube commentary culture. And that's why this discussion refuses to disappear. Because it is no longer about one interview or one clip. It has become a reflection of how audiences interpret fame itself. At this point, even neutral observers are stepping into the conversation, trying to separate emotional reactions from actual evidence. But the problem is, once a narrative goes viral, it develops its own momentum. It no longer needs confirmation. It survives on engagement. And engagement is exactly what keeps this topic alive. Every reaction video adds another layer. Every tweet adds another opinion. Every compilation adds another angle. Before long, the original context is no longer the focus. The conversation itself becomes the story. Because whether people believe the narrative is exaggerated or meaningful, one thing is undeniable. The internet is not just watching the music industry anymore, it is actively rewriting its meaning in real time. And once a narrative reaches that stage, where the internet itself becomes the storyteller, it becomes almost impossible to control or slow down. Because now, this is no longer just about what was said in a clip. It's about what people believe they are seeing behind the clip. The discussion shifts again, deeper into fan interpretation culture, where every public moment involving major artists gets dissected like evidence in a case that never officially existed in the first place. Clips of award shows start circulating again. Slow motion edits, zoomed-in reactions, background applause, even camera cuts. Everything becomes material for analysis. And what's important to understand here is how modern internet culture works. It doesn't just consume content, it recontextualizes it. A moment that once lasted 10 seconds on a stage can now live forever in thousands of different interpretations. That's exactly what happens when people revisit moments involving Adele and Beyoncé in award environments. One group of viewers sees admiration. Another group sees pressure. Another sees industry hierarchy. And another sees nothing unusual at all. All of them are reacting to the same footage, but all of them are seeing completely different stories. This is where the psychology of fame becomes important. When an artist reaches a certain level of global recognition, they stop being viewed as just individuals. They become symbols. Beyoncé is often framed as a symbol of artistic dominance and cultural influence. Adele is often framed as a symbol of emotional authenticity and vocal purity. And once people assign symbols to real individuals, they start interpreting every interaction through that symbolic lens instead of reality. That's where misinterpretation begins. Not because something is happening behind the scenes, but because audiences are actively constructing meaning from incomplete information. Meanwhile, media commentary cycles keep the conversation alive. Reaction channels, podcast discussions, and short form breakdowns continue to reframe the same moments in different tones, some serious, some sarcastic, some purely entertainment-driven. The result is a feedback loop. A clip gets posted, it gets interpreted, it gets reacted to, it gets re-edited, it gets reinterpreted again. And each cycle adds emotional weight, even if no new factual information is introduced. At the same time, older internet memes resurface. Compilation videos showing celebrities thanking Beyoncé at award shows return to circulation, often stripped of original context. These edits are designed for engagement, not accuracy. And engagement is what drives visibility. The more emotional or controversial the framing, the more likely it is to be shared. This is why discussions like this never fully disappear, they evolve instead of ending. But here's where things become even more interesting from a cultural perspective. Because underneath all of this noise, there is a real conversation happening about influence in the music industry. Not influence in a mysterious or hidden sense, but influence in the structural sense. Who inspires who? Who collaborates with who? Who sets trends? Who defines eras? These are legitimate industry discussions that often get simplified or exaggerated when they enter social media spaces. In reality, major artists often publicly acknowledge each other because the industry is interconnected. Producers overlap, writers collaborate, and creative inspiration flows in multiple directions. But online, that complexity gets compressed into simple narratives. And simple narratives spread faster. So instead of saying these artists influence each other in different ways across time, the internet tends to say this artist dominates everyone else, or this artist is intimidated by that one. That simplification is what fuels viral conversation. And once a simplified narrative goes viral, it becomes emotionally sticky. People start defending it like a truth, even if it originated from speculation or interpretation. This is where the situation around Wendy Williams' resurfaced commentary becomes especially amplified. Because Wendy is known for blunt, provocative takes, her older statements are often replayed without the context of time, tone, or entertainment framing. That transforms commentary into claims in the eyes of social media audiences. And once something is perceived as a claim, it gets treated differently than entertainment gossip. It gets debated, defended, and disputed. But even then, no official confirmation or statement from the artists involved changes the online momentum entirely, because the conversation has already become self-sustaining. At this stage, the topic is no longer about verifying truth. It is about discussing perception. And perception is far more powerful on the internet than fact in many cases, because perception is what people emotionally connect to. That's why this discussion keeps expanding instead of settling. One clip becomes 10 videos. 10 videos become hundreds of threads. Hundreds of threads become a cultural talking point that feels larger than its original source. And through all of it, the names involved remain central simply because of their global influence, not because of any new verified developments. As the conversation continues, even neutral viewers start participating just to understand why the topic refuses to die down. Some are genuinely curious about industry dynamics. Others are drawn in by curiosity. And some are simply reacting to the intensity of the online debate itself. But regardless of perspective, the pattern remains the same. The internet takes a moment, amplifies it, reinterprets it, and turns it into an ongoing narrative. And at this point, the narrative has become larger than any single interview, clip, or commentary that started it. It has become part of the wider conversation about fame, influence, and how audiences construct meaning around public figures in real time. And that brings us to a critical turning point in this discussion, because the next layer is not about what was said in the past. It's about why this type of conversation keeps coming back in new forms, no matter how many times it fades away. By the time this conversation reaches its final stretch, something important becomes clear. This was never just about one clip, one interview, or one resurfaced comment. It became a reflection of how the internet processes fame itself. Because once a narrative enters the online ecosystem, it doesn't stay in its original form. It mutates. It adapts. It gets reshaped by every new viewer who adds their interpretation into the mix. And that's exactly what happened here. What started as a resurfaced discussion around media commentary involving Adele and Beyoncé slowly turned into a broader debate about influence, perception, and the way audiences assign meaning to celebrity interactions. But as the discussion expands, the emotional intensity also increases. Because online, once a topic becomes controversial, it stops being treated as analysis and starts being treated as a position people take sides on. Some viewers interpret everything through admiration of Beyoncé's cultural impact. Others defend Adele's individuality and emotional authenticity. And another group steps back entirely, pointing out that the entire conversation may be built more on internet culture than actual industry reality. All of these perspectives coexist, but they rarely agree. And that disagreement is what fuels the cycle. As reaction content continues to circulate, older moments are continuously reintroduced into new contexts. Award speeches, interviews, red carpet interactions, everything gets reevaluated through the lens of current internet discourse. But here's the key issue: context rarely survives viral circulation. A speech meant as gratitude becomes interpreted as pressure. A moment of emotion becomes analyzed as symbolism. A simple thank you becomes part of a much larger narrative constructed by viewers rather than confirmed by participants. This is not unusual in modern celebrity culture. In fact, it is almost expected. Because in the digital age, audiences are no longer passive consumers of entertainment, they are active editors of meaning. They decide what a moment means after it happens. And that power is what makes discussions like this so persistent. Even when the original conversation fades, it returns later in waves, often triggered by unrelated events, new award seasons, or viral compilation videos. Each time it returns, it feels slightly different because the internet itself has changed in between cycles. New platforms emerge, new audiences join the discussion, and new interpretations replace old ones. But the core structure remains the same, a cycle of attention, interpretation, and amplification. From a media perspective, this is less about individuals and more about system behavior. Fame creates visibility. Visibility creates interpretation. Interpretation creates narrative. And narrative creates engagement. Once that chain is established, it becomes self-sustaining. And that is why conversations like this never fully disappear. They simply go quiet until something reignites them again. At the same time, it's important to separate entertainment discourse from reality. The music industry is built on collaboration, competition, influence, and evolution. Artists inspire each other constantly, often in ways that are mutual rather than one-sided. But online spaces tend to flatten that complexity into simpler emotional stories because simple stories are easier to share, react to, and emotionally engage with. That's why two artists can be discussed in completely opposite ways depending on who is telling the story. One narrative becomes about dominance. Another becomes about admiration. Another becomes about rivalry. And another becomes about misunderstanding. All of them can circulate at the same time, even if they contradict each other. And in that contradiction lies the real story, not about the artists themselves, but about the audience interpreting them. As this discussion comes to an end, what remains is not a confirmed claim or a resolved controversy. What remains is a reflection of how modern digital culture works. A single resurfaced clip can evolve into a global debate. A single interpretation can turn into a trend. And a single narrative can survive purely because it is engaging, not because it is verified. So when people ask why this topic keeps coming back, the answer is not hidden in the artists, it's hidden in the system that keeps recycling attention. And that system rewards emotion over accuracy, reaction over context, and narrative over nuance. Which brings everything back to the same point. In the world of viral media, truth is often less influential than perception. And perception is shaped not by what is officially said, but by what the internet decides to believe. So whether someone sees this entire conversation as overanalysis, cultural commentary, or meaningful insight depends entirely on their perspective. But one thing is undeniable. The moment fame enters the digital space, it stops belonging only to the artist and starts belonging to the audience too. And that is where the real story has been unfolding all along. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think all of this is just internet overthinking, people reading way too much into award shows, speeches, and celebrity moments that were never meant to be decoded this deeply? Or do you believe there's actually a real pattern behind how the industry operates and how influence is acknowledged on that level? Because at this point, the conversation is bigger than just two artists. It's about how fame, perception, and social media culture are shaping the way we interpret everything we see in entertainment today. Drop your thoughts in the comments, whether you agree, disagree, or see something completely different. Every perspective adds to this discussion, and this is one of those topics where people are clearly split right down the middle. And if you made it this far, you're clearly interested in these deep dive breakdowns, not just surface level gossip, but the full picture behind the conversation. So make sure you like the video if you want more content like this, and subscribe for more industry breakdowns, viral stories, and commentary that goes beyond the headlines. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update, because discussions like this don't end here. They evolve, they resurface, and they always come back with something new to talk about. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.